In this episode, we dive into the terrifying moment where a family gets eaten by sharks after crashing into the deep waters off California, along with other shark attack stories. From a surfer who attracted a bull shark, to a military routine dive turned bloody due to a great white shark. But first, let's start with our first story. The evening of March 22, 2015 brought one of the most severe Pacific storms in years to California's coastal highways. Rain hammered the asphalt of Highway 1 with relentless fury, while winds howled through the towering redwoods that line the treacherous coastal route. For most travelers, it was a night to stay indoors. But for the Morrison family from Sacramento, it was just another obstacle on their annual spring break journey to Carmel. David Morrison, 42, gripped the steering wheel of their Honda Pilot with white knuckles, his methodical nature as an insurance adjuster keeping him focused on the road ahead. Beside him, Sarah, 38, a high school teacher known for her calm demeanor in crisis situations, monitored the GPS while keeping an eye on their two teenagers in the back seat. Emma, 16, and Jake, 14, were both honor students who had been looking forward to this family tradition for months. David had always prided himself on being a cautious driver, the kind of man who checked weather reports twice and kept emergency supplies in the trunk. Sarah often joked that his insurance background made him overly paranoid about risks, but she appreciated his attention to safety. The teenagers, despite their usual complaints about family trips, genuinely enjoyed these annual escapes from their busy academic lives. Emma was already planning to study marine biology in college, inspired by their previous coastal adventures, while Jake dreamed of becoming a photographer like his uncle. The family had been discussing their plans for the next day as they drove through the storm. Sarah had researched tide pools they could explore, while Emma excitedly talked about the marine life she hoped to photograph. Jake was more interested in the dramatic coastline shots he could capture with his new camera. Their conversation was filled with the easy familiarity of a family that genuinely enjoyed each other's company, making what was about to happen even more tragic. David had been driving this route for over a decade, but he'd never encountered conditions this severe. The storm had been building all day, and weather reports warned of possible flooding and debris on the coastal highways. Several times, Sarah had suggested they pull over and wait for the worst to pass, but David was confident in his driving abilities and eager to reach their hotel before the roads became completely impassable. At 7:20 p.m., as torrential rain reduced visibility to mere yards, David's worst nightmare materialized in his headlights. A massive redwood, weakened by the storm's fury, had crashed across both lanes of the highway. With no time to brake and nowhere to go, David made a split-second decision that would haunt the sole survivor forever. He swerved hard to the right, hoping to avoid the fallen giant, but the rain-slicked asphalt offered no grip for the heavy SUV. The Honda Pilot hydroplaned violently, spinning twice before crashing through the weakened guardrail with a sickening crunch of metal and wood. For a terrifying moment, the family was airborne, suspended 35 feet above the churning waters of Seal Cove. The impact with the frigid Pacific was devastating, but miraculously, all four family members survived the initial crash. As their vehicle began its rapid descent into the 52-degree water, David's emergency training kicked in. He helped his family escape through the sunroof, but the shock of the freezing water immediately began affecting their motor functions. The family found themselves separated by strong currents of water that would prove fatal within 15 to 20 minutes due to hypothermia alone. But Seal Cove was also known for its elephant seal population, which occasionally attracted great white sharks to the area. In the darkness below, a 17-foot great white had been patrolling these waters with senses so acute it could detect a single drop of blood from over a quarter-mile away. These ancient predators possess electroreceptors called ampullae of Lorenzini that can sense the electrical fields generated by a beating heart, making them nearly impossible to hide from once they begin hunting. Sarah, struggling in the dark water and wearing a dark jacket, caught the attention of this massive predator through the electrical impulses of her panicked heartbeat and the splashing that mimicked a wounded seal. The attack was swift and typical of great white behavior. A single devastating bite before the shark retreated to assess its prey. Sarah's scream was cut short as the massive predator struck, inflicting fatal injuries before disappearing back into the depths. David, already weakened from hypothermia, desperately tried to reach his children, but the combination of freezing water, strong currents, and shock proved overwhelming. Emma and Jake, both strong swimmers under normal circumstances, succumbed to hypothermia within minutes of their mother's attack. Coast Guard helicopters arrived 18 minutes later, their searchlights cutting through the storm to find David barely conscious, hypothermic, and clinging to debris. He was the sole survivor of a tragedy where the ocean's cold proved as deadly as its most feared predator. But while this family's nightmare unfolded in the chaos of a storm, another victim would soon discover that even experienced ocean enthusiasts aren't safe from the predators that lurk in familiar waters. The morning of August 17, 2016 dawned with deceptive beauty over New Smyrna Beach, Florida. Golden sunlight painted the horizon as gentle waves rolled toward shore, creating the perfect conditions that had made this stretch of coastline famous among surfers worldwide. But beneath the surface, overnight storms had stirred up the water, reducing visibility and bringing schools of baitfish dangerously close to shore. Conditions that would prove dangerous for one local surfer. Jake Martinez, 24, had been part of New Smyrna Beach's tight-knit surfing community for 8 years. Working at the local surf shop gave him access to the best equipment and inside knowledge about wave conditions. But more importantly, it connected him to a lifestyle he genuinely loved. Friends described Jake as the embodiment of the laid-back surfer culture. Sun-bleached hair, perpetual tan, and an infectious enthusiasm for riding waves that made him popular with both locals and tourists who visited the shop. Despite his easygoing nature, Jake was known for his dedication to the sport. He would often arrive at the beach before dawn, checking conditions and waxing his board, while most of the town still slept. His co-workers respected his wave knowledge and often asked his advice about the best times to surf. Jake lived in a small apartment just 2 blocks from the beach, and his morning routine rarely varied. Coffee, check the surf report, grab his board, and paddle out before the crowds arrived. Jake had been particularly excited about this morning's session because the overnight storm had created the kind of clean, powerful waves that only came a few times each year. He'd been tracking the weather system for days, watching as it moved up the coast and generated the perfect combination of wind and swell. His girlfriend had teased him about his obsession with wave forecasts, but Jake lived for these moments, when all the conditions aligned perfectly. On this particular morning, Jake made a decision that his experience should have warned him against. Heavy overnight rains had created the murky water conditions that bull sharks prefer for hunting. Local fishing boats had been active the previous evening, and there had been 2 bull shark sightings reported just days earlier. At 6:15 a.m., Jake paddled out alone in the water that looked deceptively inviting. The waves were clean and consistent, exactly the kind of conditions he lived for. But the visibility was severely compromised by the storm runoff. As he sat on his board 100 yards from shore waiting for the perfect set, Jake was unaware that somewhere beneath him lurked one of the ocean's most aggressive predators. Bull sharks are unique among their species for their ability to tolerate fresh water, often swimming far up rivers and into brackish estuaries where the murky conditions give them a hunting advantage. Unlike great whites, which rely primarily on ambush tactics, bull sharks are known for their territorial aggression and willingness to attack anything they perceive as a threat or potential prey. Jake felt something bump his leg beneath the surface, the investigative behavior typical of bull sharks in murky water. The 7-foot bull shark struck with a single powerful bite to Jake's right leg, severing major arteries and causing immediate massive blood loss. Unlike the prolonged attacks often depicted in movies, this was the reality of most shark encounters. One bite, then the shark retreated, likely realizing Jake wasn't its preferred prey. But the damage was done. Jake's femoral artery had been severed, and he was losing blood at a rate that would prove fatal within minutes. Jake managed to scream for help and began paddling desperately toward shore, leaving a trail of blood in the water behind them. Early morning beachgoers heard his cries and immediately called 911, while 2 experienced surfers paddled out to help. They reached Jake within 4 minutes, but he was already going into shock from blood loss. Despite their efforts to apply pressure to the wound and get him to shore, Jake lost consciousness before they reached the beach. Paramedics worked frantically to save Jake's life, but the massive blood loss from the severed artery proved fatal. He died at the scene, surrounded by the surfing community that had embraced him as one of their own. The attack was typical of bull shark behavior in murky water. A single investigative bite that, tragically, struck a major blood vessel. But while Jake's death shocked the tight-knit surfing community of New Smyrna Beach, hundreds of miles away, another ocean enthusiast was about to learn that even the buddy system couldn't guarantee safety when equipment failure meets predator. The afternoon of May 22, 2017 brought perfect conditions to the waters 20 miles off Key Largo, Florida. Crystal clear visibility extended for dozens of feet in every direction, while gentle currents promised excellent hunting for the weekend spearfishermen who made the long boat ride to these productive offshore waters. For Antonio Silva, 29, it was exactly the kind of day he'd been hoping for when he planned this diving trip with his longtime friend Carlos. Antonio worked as a construction foreman during the week, but weekends belonged to the ocean. For 5 years, he had been perfecting his free diving technique and spearfishing skills, transforming from a nervous beginner into a confident hunter who could hold his breath for over 3 minutes and dive to depths that impressed even experienced spearfishermen. His Miami apartment was decorated with photos from successful trips, Antonio grinning beside large grouper, snapper, and other prize catches that he had taken with his custom spear gun. Friends described Antonio as methodical and safety conscious, the kind of person who researched dive sites thoroughly and never took unnecessary risks. He had completed advanced freediving courses and always dove with a buddy, understanding that the ocean's beauty masked very real dangers. His construction background had taught him to respect safety protocols, and he applied the same careful approach to his underwater hunting. Carlos, his regular diving partner, trusted Antonio's judgment completely, knowing that his friend's conservative approach had kept them both safe during dozens of previous trips. Antonio had been planning this particular trip for weeks, studying weather patterns and tide charts to ensure optimal conditions. He'd invested in new equipment recently, a more powerful spear gun and a specialized wetsuit designed for deep water hunting. His girlfriend often worried about his weekend adventures, but Antonio always returned with stories of incredible underwater encounters and enough fresh fish to feed their extended families. The two friends had made the long boat ride before dawn, timing their arrival to coincide with the peak feeding periods when large fish would be most active. They'd already had a successful morning, with Carlos landing a beautiful yellowtail snapper and Antonio taking a respectable grouper. The camaraderie between the two men was evident as they shared techniques and celebrated each other's successes. Their friendship strengthened by years of shared adventures beneath the waves. At 1:45 p.m., Antonio and Carlos were diving in their usual formation, staying within sight of each other while hunting along the coral reef structure that typically held large fish. The underwater currents, barely noticeable at the surface, were stronger than expected at depth, As Antonio pursued a large grouper into a coral canyon, the current caught him and swept him several hundred yards from Carlos before either man realized what was happening. When Antonio surfaced for air, he found himself alone in the vast expanse of blue water, his boat barely visible in the distance. Rather than panic, Antonio decided to continue hunting while he waited for Carlos to surface and spot him. The grouper he speared was magnificent, easily 30 pounds and exactly the kind of fish that made these long offshore trips worthwhile. But as the wounded fish struggled on his spear, its blood and erratic movements created a scent trail that would attract attention from one of the ocean's most opportunistic predators. Somewhere in the blue depths below, a 10-foot tiger shark had detected the disturbance. Tiger sharks are often called the wastebaskets of the sea because they'll eat almost anything, from fish and seals to license plates and tin cans found in their stomachs. Their incredibly powerful jaws can crush turtle shells, and their serrated teeth can slice through almost any material, making them one of the most dangerous sharks to encounter. Unlike great whites, which are more selective in their prey, tiger sharks investigate everything with their mouths, often leading to fatal encounters with humans. The tiger shark approached slowly, drawn by the scent of blood and the vibrations of the struggling fish. When Antonio surfaced for air 300 yards from his boat, he found himself face to face with one of the ocean's most unpredictable predators. The shark's initial interest was clearly in the speared fish, but Antonio's attempts to fend off the predator while maintaining control of his catch created a chaotic situation. The tiger shark struck with typical opportunistic behavior, grabbing the speared grouper but also catching Antonio's arm in its powerful jaws. The bite was devastating. Tiger sharks possess one of the strongest bite forces in the ocean, easily capable of severing limbs. Antonio's scream alerted Carlos, who immediately started the boat engine, but the damage was already done. The shark released Antonio after realizing he wasn't food, but the massive trauma to his arm had severed major arteries. Carlos reached his friend within 3 minutes, but Antonio was already unconscious from blood loss and shock. Despite immediate first aid and a frantic race back to shore, Antonio died from his injuries before they could reach medical help. His body was recovered, and the investigation showed classic tiger shark bite patterns. The predator had been attracted by the speared fish, but had accidentally caught Antonio in what marine biologists call competitive feeding behavior. The tragedy reinforced the critical importance of the buddy system in spearfishing, but it also highlighted how quickly situations can deteriorate when blood in the water attracts opportunistic predators. While Antonio's death devastated the Miami spearfishing community across the country, a highly trained military diver was about to discover that even the most advanced training couldn't prevent a perfect storm of equipment failure and predator encounter. The morning of September 14, 2018 brought ideal conditions to the waters 15 miles west of Camp Pendleton, California. Calm seas and excellent visibility created perfect conditions for the advanced underwater infiltration training exercise that would test the skills of some of the Marine Corps' most elite operators. For Staff Sergeant Marcus Johnson, 28, it was just another day of pushing the boundaries of what was possible beneath the surface of the Pacific Ocean. Marcus was a Marine Force reconnaissance operator with 6 years of military diving experience and over 100 training dives under his belt. His fellow Marines respected his technical expertise and calm demeanor under pressure, qualities that have made him a natural choice for the most challenging underwater missions. Growing up in rural Montana, Marcus had never seen the ocean until he joined the Marines, but he had taken to underwater operations with natural aptitude. His instructors noted his exceptional breath control and his ability to remain calm in high-stress situations. He had completed advanced courses in underwater navigation, combat diving, and equipment maintenance, earning certifications that qualified him for the most sensitive reconnaissance missions. Marcus had been looking forward to this particular training exercise because it would test new navigation techniques he'd been developing. He'd spent weeks studying the underwater topography of the training area and had even practiced the route in a swimming pool back at base. His attention to detail was legendary among his unit. He was the kind of Marine who memorized backup plans for his backup plans, and his teammates often joked that Marcus could navigate underwater blindfolded. The night before the exercise, Marcus had spent hours meticulously checking his rebreather system, testing every component, and running diagnostic checks on the CO2 scrubber that would keep him alive during the extended underwater mission. He'd been using a closed-circuit rebreather for 3 years and had never experienced a significant malfunction. But his training had taught him that equipment failure was always a possibility in the unforgiving marine environment. At 11:15 a.m., Marcus was conducting an underwater navigation exercise using a closed-circuit rebreather with his dive buddy positioned 50 yards away as per standard protocol. The exercise was routine. Navigate to a series of underwater waypoints while maintaining communication with his partner. Marcus had completed similar exercises dozens of times. But on this day, his rebreather began to malfunction in a way that would prove catastrophic. The CO2 scrubber in Marcus's rebreather failed gradually, allowing dangerous levels of carbon dioxide to build up in his breathing loop. The symptoms came on slowly at first, slight confusion and shortness of breath that Marcus initially attributed to exertion. But within minutes, the CO2 poisoning was affecting his judgment and motor skills. Following emergency protocols, Marcus signaled his dive buddy and began an emergency ascent to the surface. Marcus surfaced in an area where elephant seals had been feeding throughout the morning, though the marine wildlife briefing had been delayed due to administrative issues. As he floated on the surface, struggling to clear his rebreather and signal for pickup, Marcus was unaware that a 15-foot great white had been patrolling the seal colony just beneath the surface. Great whites are perfectly evolved killing machines, unchanged for millions of years, with the ability to detect electrical impulses as weak as 0.5 billionth of a volt, roughly equivalent to the electrical field of a flashlight battery connected to electrodes placed 1,000 miles apart in the ocean. This incredible sensitivity allows them to detect the heartbeat of a seal from remarkable distances, making them nearly impossible to evade once they've locked onto a target. His black wetsuit and erratic movements at the surface closely resembled the wounded seal, exactly the kind of prey that triggers a great white's hunting instincts. The attack came from below with the explosive force typical of great white hunting behavior. The massive shark struck once, inflicting devastating injuries before immediately retreating. Classic great white behavior when the prey doesn't match their preferred food source. Marcus's emergency beacon activated automatically, immediately alerting his dive team to his location. But the single bite had caused massive trauma to his torso and legs. The support boat reached Marcus's location within 6 minutes. Guided by his emergency beacon and his dive buddy who had surfaced nearby. The crew found Marcus floating unconscious, his wetsuit torn and bloodied from the shark's attack. Despite immediate medical attention and emergency evacuation, Marcus died from his injuries during the helicopter flight to the trauma center. The large seal population in the immediate area made it clear why the attack had occurred. Marcus had surfaced directly in the great white's natural hunting grounds during peak feeding time. The incident led to immediate changes in military diving protocols, including mandatory marine wildlife briefings before all training exercises and improved rebreather maintenance procedures. Marcus's death served as a tragic reminder that even the most highly trained operators are vulnerable when equipment failure forces them to surface in dangerous waters. But while military training exercises carry inherent risk, the final story in our series involves a tragedy that occurred during what should have been a routine commercial operation, where safety protocols and professional expertise couldn't prevent a mechanical failure from turning deadly. The afternoon of October 8, 2013 brought perfect conditions to the water surrounding Guadalupe Island, Mexico. Crystal clear visibility extended for over 100 feet in every direction, while the absence of wind created the calm surface conditions that cage diving operators dream of. For Michael "Shark Mike" Thompson, 35, it was exactly the kind of day that reminded him why he had chosen to make his living bringing tourists face to face with the ocean's most magnificent predators. Michael was an experienced shark cage diving guide who had been working the waters around Guadalupe Island for 4 years. His marine biology degree and dive master certification made him uniquely qualified to educate tourists about great white shark behavior while keeping them safe during their underwater encounters. Clients appreciated his genuine respect for the animals and his encyclopedic knowledge of individual sharks that frequented the area. Friends and colleagues described Michael as safety obsessed, the kind of guide who checked and double-checked every piece of equipment before each dive. He had personally supervised thousands of cage dives without a single serious incident, earning a reputation as one of the most reliable operators in the business. His passion for shark conservation was evident in every briefing he gave, and many clients left Guadalupe Island with a newfound respect for these apex predators thanks to Michael's educational approach. Michael had been particularly excited about this trip because several of the island's most famous resident sharks had been spotted in recent days, including Deep Blue, a massive female estimated to be over 20 feet long. He'd been photographing and cataloging the sharks around Guadalupe for years, contributing valuable data to marine research organizations. His clients often remarked that Michael seemed to have a personal relationship with many of the sharks, recognizing individuals by their unique markings and behavioral patterns. The morning had started perfectly, with multiple shark sightings and enthusiastic clients who were getting the experience of a lifetime. Michael had conducted 3 successful cage dives already, each one providing spectacular close encounters with great whites. His safety record was impeccable. In 4 years of operation, he'd never had so much as a minor injury occur on one of his trips, a testament to his meticulous attention to detail and conservative approach to risk management. At 2:30 p.m., Michael was conducting a routine cage diving tour with 6 excited clients, all of whom had traveled thousands of miles for the chance to see great white sharks in their natural habitat. The day had been exceptional. Multiple sharks had visited the cage, including a massive 17-foot female that the crew had nicknamed Isabella. The clients were thrilled with their close encounters, and Michael was preparing for the final dive of the day when a seemingly minor equipment issue would escalate into tragedy. As Michael performed his standard pre-dive safety check, he noticed that one of the cage's secondary locking pins had worked loose, a minor maintenance issue that normally would require only a few minutes to fix. The massive female great white circled nearby, her behavior calm and predictable as she investigated the cage structure. Michael had seen this behavior thousands of times before and felt completely safe making the quick repair while the clients watched from the boat. Working methodically as always, Michael tightened the loose pin and tested the door mechanism to ensure it was functioning properly. What he didn't notice was that the constant motion of the waves had caused metal fatigue in the door's primary hinge, a microscopic crack that had been developing over months of regular use. As Michael pushed against the door to test its security, he was unaware that the great white circling below possessed a bite force of over 4,000 pounds per square inch, more than enough to crush a small car. These apex predators have evolved rows of razor-sharp serrated teeth that continuously regenerate throughout their lifetime, with some individuals shedding over 35,000 teeth in their lifespan, each one designed to slice through flesh and bone with surgical precision. The weakened hinge finally gave way completely and the door swung open with sudden violence. Michael, caught off balance by the unexpected movement, fell backward out of the cage. In that split second, he found himself in open water just yards from one of the ocean's most powerful predators. The great white, startled by the sudden splash and movement, reacted with the lightning-fast reflexes that have made these sharks the ocean's most efficient hunters. The attack was swift and devastating. A single powerful bite that inflicted massive trauma before the shark immediately retreated, likely realizing that Michael wasn't its preferred prey. This behavior is typical of great white encounters with humans. They investigate with a bite, then usually disengage when they realize the mistake. But for Michael, floating in the water with catastrophic injuries, that single bite was fatal. The boat crew immediately threw life rings and initiated emergency procedures, but Michael had lost consciousness within seconds of the attack. The massive trauma to his torso and the rapid blood loss made rescue efforts futile. By the time the crew pulled him from the water, Michael had already succumbed to his injuries. The great white had disappeared into the depths, its brief investigation complete. Michael's death was ruled an accident caused by equipment failure, specifically the metal fatigue in the cage door hinge that hadn't been detected during routine inspections. The incident led to mandatory daily stress testing of all cage components and the implementation of backup safety mechanisms for all cage diving operations at Guadalupe Island. Michael's tragedy served as a sobering reminder that even the most experienced professionals are vulnerable when mechanical failure puts them in direct contact with apex predators. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.